referring back to Dewey, 1927, The Public and Its Problems, which a lot of people are now reading. And I was really, really inspired myself by reading it. Well, this is lovely. So that pragmatist tradition, which is actually setting itself up to say, how do we ground our assertions of what might be true, what we should do, what is practically achievable, when we no longer can believe in that science will give us the truth of the objective world, and we no longer believe there's somebody up there who's going to give us the guidance that we should work on. I think perhaps in the 1960s there was a joke going around saying that the planner had been put up there as God, but unfortunately the planner is, well, fortunately, has been removed from that position. So when we have no external transcendence, how can we ground all our claims? And there's a lot of interesting discussion in that. The social theory about that we're therefore constructing knowledge as we go along, it's very much influencing the collaborative planning work. I think behind John Forrester and my own work is this very clear. For me also, Giddens' work on the interrelationship between the way in which phenomena that we get to call structural determinants, how that interacts with the way we all go about doing things, and how structure is something which is not given externally, but is continually formed, asserted and formed and shaped in the ongoing flow of people living their lives, and how in the ongoing flow of us living our lives we invent things which then become solidified and become to have structural role. I think that interaction is really interesting. I got it from Giddens, and I think maybe it'd be interesting to have other people have a look at that relationship and how we're thinking about it. But it's deeply underneath the collaborative, communicative idea. The historical, evolutionary notion, for me, this was always really important, that things evolve and change, and that things are coming from a particular position, or the governance arrangements are coming from particular positions, but they're not static, they shift, and therefore you want to be looking for the cracks and the possibilities for pushing through new ideas. Non-transcendental, I think this word transcendence is now being used in so many different categories that perhaps we haven't put that to a slippery concept it's turned into. But it's really coming back to what I was saying before. There isn't anything outside. We have outside our human understanding and our human understanding of the non-human. But nevertheless, there are some things which we all might agree. I was trying to explain it to somebody completely different the other day, and I have a cat, and it's sitting on me, and I said, probably all humans can agree that this is something like a cat, but we cannot agree on what we feel about a cat. So as John Forrester says, we might agree on some phenomena which we can fix and say, for now, it's okay, this is a cat. But what's at issue is, do we want a cat in the house? Should we ban cats from the neighbourhood? And in Australia, they get very worried about those things because cats are not native to Australian wildlife. And what do you do then? I've talked also about the interactive side, and I think also the social theory gives us a good take, the more precise social theory, identifying, so when these people are getting together, what is actually at stake and who has a stake in these particular governance processes. It's quite interesting to me as I observe various examples of people trying to work collaboratively, how often they fail to identify what is it that's bothering us. So you have a kind of something which is called a collaborative process, but it's actually a sort of consultation process. Everybody gets together, but they don't know why and where and how and which. So getting clear what the stakes are, and what is controversial about them, and what is fixed is really important. So anyway, there's a lot in the intellectual stuff which is making us think, which helps us situate the collaborative, communicative ideas. Political orientation, and I put that back to what I was saying before about the democratic issues, that we've been struggling all through the 20th century, which somebody calls the century of democracy, because prior to the 20th century, we didn't really have very many democratic societies with which we could sort of think about ourselves. America knew it was a democracy. France was going backwards and forwards. We didn't know what we meant. Through the 20th century, we've now become all sorts of different examples of what a democratic process might be. But we're still struggling about it. And throughout the 20th century, and this is where Dewey's interesting, because he's talking all the time about what he means about what is a participatory and deliberative democracy. He doesn't use those words really, but that's what he's arguing for at a time when an elite technocratic democracy was actually evolving in the US. That's a very, very interesting storyline, and we have David Prosperi, who may make some comments about this, coming from the US with a bit more insight into it. And I think that that would be the same a movement that we'd see the welfare states went into far too much of an elite technocratic version of a welfare democracy. And I think after a while people began to feel that that was positive enough. We've also got, within the political area, the really complex coordination issues. And as soon as you start recomposing, saying we have to focus on environmental issues, we have to focus on place-based issues, you have these huge problems of reconstituting the structures within which you've got a political focus on these issues. So the coordination issues become very difficult. People set up all sorts of agencies. I guess each of our different countries, we've got agencies which have been set up to deal with the problem, and there is, oh my goodness, to whom are they accountable? What's their legitimacy? Why are they doing this? And, oh, we better link them to them. So all sorts of legitimation challenges as new initiatives crop up. And the result of that is lots of conflict. And some people think that collaborative planning is all about building consensus. It's all about the attempt to come to an outcome of consensus. But I think that, that for me, conflict, a lot of the time, there's a lot of positive benefits of conflict. What you're trying to limit is destructive conflict. Conflict which makes things deeper and more difficult. So anyway, I talked about the normative stance as well. So I'm being reminded that I must keep to time, so I should just very briefly talk about the practice orientation. There's a lot of work going on about practices of collaborative work. Looking at, some people are looking at arenas, stages and settings. Martin Heyer, as his work, has got a new book on authoritative governance, which is very much elaborating on that. Who gets to act, what scripts and performances are going on. And we may worry that ordinary citizens are not performing, but of course we all are. We're all performing as we engage interactively with each other. We get interested in the ethical dimension. How is it appropriate to behave in different kinds of settings, in the flow of action, and also how we make practical judgments about when to open up, when to close down, when, as Phil was talking, put a line on a map, when to bring forward an image. And the interesting empirical question is how do all these stick together? So I think I would say the planning field is very interesting to us as a test bed for a kind of richly informed, inclusive democratic practices. So, well, I said I was going to look at three questions, and I was going to look at this in relationship to three areas of planning work. The three questions, which I'll kind of very briefly highlight, and then I'll come back quickly to some answers. How do we identify the interaction, qualities and technologies of a set of relationships? That's secondly, how do we assess whether the use of the vocabulary of the term collaborative planning is more than just rhetorics, and is more than being used for just the instrumental reasons of making coordination work better? And is there anything we can say generally about the collaborative planning or communicative planning idea which sticks to the idea wherever we find it? Or is it so slippery that you just have to look at how it's being specifically realised? And the three areas of planning work which I've found very interesting, how do I condense the whole field? I've looked at examples which are in relationship to managing neighbourhood change, just a small-scale routine